Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this nice sunny day, and we pray that you'll watch over us today and bless our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to call it Muzzled. I think that's what they would like to do to a lot of us. So, listen, I've not closed my Facebook account. I've not closed my Twitter account. And one of the reasons why I've not done that, one is I like the way they work. I don't like what they do to us from time to time. But it's been a long time since I've been blocked, and maybe I just don't post enough controversial stuff, I guess. But I think there are some keywords you can avoid and still get the message across that seem to trigger the censors. But I've seen a number of people, they've closed their Facebook account or their Twitter account, and what somebody does is come in and they like clone their account. And they start putting up stuff that these people wouldn't do, and so now they have that issue to deal with. So to avoid that, I think I'm going to keep my accounts. And I've opened a Telegram account, and part of the problem is I don't have time to manage all these different social medias. So I don't have a Gab account. I do have a Telegram account. I have a MeWe account. I had a Parler account. And everybody thinks Parler's coming back. I'm skeptical that it will. They fired the CEO this week of the company that had set it up because he was, I guess, allowing things that people don't like because he hadn't muzzled himself, I guess, or muzzled everybody that's on there. And what's interesting is we see this convergence of events is this constant push on social media to censor everybody and to just have everybody be shut down. And I just think it's going to get worse in the near term. So I don't know what the answer is. I guess we're just plugging along, and I have some scripture verses I'll share in a little bit, I think, that indicate one of the ways we should act. And is anybody tired of the snow yet? That thing we had last Sunday, where we live, we got about 6 or 7 inches. Then we got like 1.5 inches of rain, and then we got another 4 or 5 inches of snow and then in the middle there we got another half or quarter or half inch of rain. And where it drains along the side of my driveway, my snowblower wouldn't even budge it, so I had to shovel it by hand. And I think each shovelful weighed about 65 to 80 pounds. Am I right? It was a workout. So, and no, I'm not coming over to help you. And I hear Pam said we should get maybe 8 to 12 inches of snow by Thursday. More. That's what she told me as I was leaving the house. So I don't know. If you can send any complaints about that directly to her. Well, it is a disrupted world. These are some of the different platforms that we're on, YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, Remnant Truth Network, Blog Talk Radio, Christian Sentinel, and then Rumble. And I think we have another, I don't know what other ones we're on, but usually in the description of the YouTube video, we'll post the links to the other videos if we're allowed to. I know some people try to do that, and they've been blocked from even doing that, because YouTube wants to control everything. And I would say that if YouTube was trying to decide or design a way for the YouTube app to be less attractive and desirable to use, they are succeeding fabulously at that. It's getting more and more difficult to use. And it used to be when I would do a search for certain things, they would pop right up, and now we got to scroll way down the list, even when you put in the exact name of the YouTube channel. It's clear what they're doing. So listen, we talk about this a lot, that especially Romans chapter 1, verse 28, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. So I'm going to talk about a number of things that I think are going on, some scripture, then we'll do a little bit on the Middle East, and I am not going to get to the Davos thing on the Great Reset this week. There's just too many videos to watch, and I want to do it in a little bit more coherent fashion than just throwing a bunch of things. I do have some comments about it, and I don't know that we should call it the Great Reset that they want to call it. I think we should call it the Great Setup, because that's what it seems to be more like. The Great Revealing of the Great Setup, I guess, is what I would call it instead of the Great Reset. So here's a editorial cartoon I think kind of captures. It's a little bit along the lines of my title slide. I think that's, and you see down here the dead carcass of privacy and regulation, and they're trying to get Facebook back in there. And look, this is a problem all over the world. Even governments in Europe are complaining about big tech, that it's gotten too big. And I posted this, I thought this was a great quote, comparing Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and Orwell's 1984. And just a reminder to our politicians in Washington, 1984 was not intended to be a user's manual, a guide to how you're supposed to do things. It was not like the Cliff Notes version of destroying society. Neil Postman, in his book Amusing Ourselves to Death, contrasted the fears that Orwell and Huxley held for society. What Orwell feared was those who would ban books. Huxley feared that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Orwell feared truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared that we would become a trivial culture. In Orwell's 1984, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Huxley's Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we fear will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we desire would ruin us. And you know what? They're both right. They both describe this dystopian society. Now, one of the things is we've seen these, the newspaper, the mainstream media, which I do review because I want to know what the enemy is doing. It's become this massive propaganda machine. It's like they're continually trying to beat you over the head with a certain message. So now the message is that anybody who voted for Trump, anybody that supported Trump, which is like half the country, roughly, you're an insurrectionist, you're a white supremacist, you're a racist, you're a violent insurrectionist, and that type of thing. And again, this is a tactic of the left, is that they accuse you of being what they really are. They are the racists, they are the supremacists, they are the controlling people. And has anybody said, so I've seen these articles today about how much it costs for Trump to incite the things that happened on January 6th. And I saw a number of like $519 billion or something. I don't know, maybe it was 519 million. I don't know, it was some ridiculous number. And I'm like, so where are the numbers about like all the riots that are going on, even as we speak, in Portland and Salem, Oregon, and Seattle, and the 5 miles of buildings that were burned in Minneapolis? Where is the numbers on all? It's like that doesn't even exist. I saw videos last night. Andy No, NGO, he posts a lot of these on Twitter, and he was showing these Antifa people going down, getting involved in disputes with police in downtown Washington, D.C. last night. Did you know this? I mean, you have to dig around to find. That's why I like Twitter, because it's really probably a more reliable source of news a lot of times than the mainstream media, which seems to follow this very rigid agenda. So this was in the New York Times this week. Now, I'm going to give the New York Times and Washington Post some credit, because in their stories where they talk about all the people arrested for July 6th, they accompany it with, like, for example, here's an editorial, Capitol Mob's phone apps betrayed them. This is an editorial in the New York Times on Friday, or maybe it was yesterday. And what you see down at the bottom of the page is you see these pictures of what they were able to pull off the phone of one of the people that was arrested. So, for example, what they pulled off was the route that he took to get to Washington, D.C. And then you see everything that he did and everywhere that he went on July 6th using his phone app. The problem is, and here's like a bunch of people that they got on this slide, about 6 different people, how they got there. The problem is the New York Times got this information. They bought it from private companies. And then they were able to take, using multiple database and comparisons, they were able to tie that supposedly private, non-discoverable information about individuals. They were able to tie it to individuals that were arrested in the connection with the July 6 events. And folks, I've watched some of the videos of July 6. Look, there were people that were out of control, that were doing things they shouldn't do. But then there were other people. I saw people at the speaker podium in the House chamber praying. I saw a bunch of people at the beginning of the riot. You go in the Capitol Rotunda and they have those, ropes up, and they're marching down the middle of the ropes about 2 across. That's all that would fit. That doesn't seem like a mob to me. Now, it did get out of control, but I think the narrative that's being shoved down our throats. We also know that there's a certain young congresswoman from New York that claimed that she was in fear for her life, and she had to hide out in a bathroom. It turns out that the bathroom was in an office building hundreds of feet away. They would have to go through a tunnel, and the rioters and mob never got there, and she was upset, and she said, when the policeman came to check on me, I could see the hostility towards me in his eyes. Now listen, I don't think anybody should do anything to her. I think we should keep her there as an example of what happens to people when they get educated to the point of silliness and stupidity. So keep her in office, let her rant, let her get on Twitter, but call her out on it. But people started calling her the same last name as the actor in Chicago. Remember, he faked the race? Yeah, Mr. Smollett. And so she said she wants everybody to report the people who have called her Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez Smollett. So go ahead, report me. Okay, spell my name right, send it to her. I don't really care. I think she's a very dangerous individual. I think they're all a bunch of dangerous people there, and they're on both sides of the aisle now a lot of times. So here's another guy. So you see here. Now, the interesting thing is it shows all of him, at the rally stage, going to Hyatt Regency, around the Capitol building. And do you know what it says here? Around the Capitol building. Because some of the information only gets you, for example, it says that the accuracy of when he's around the Capitol building is either 187 feet or 322 feet. Well, 322 feet is 100 yards. So he's somewhere within that 100-yard circle. But they're able to track them more specifically when you compare all these different databases. And so they did find a phone ping tied to this Ronnie Vincent. And here is sort of a little video of this is the rally. And then it will show you what happens over the course of 10 hours. See how they move down to the Capitol? but it's not near the big crowd that it was at the beginning. It's crazy. Even the Washington Post in their editorial page, I think this morning, has an editorial. So the New York Times has an editorial saying, man, we don't like this. The New York Times has done a big project over the last year and a half called the Privacy Project, where they've showed how these apps can track you, and it's all being done by private individuals, private big tech companies, and they're taking your data and selling it. And even liberals and people on the left don't like it because it's destroying people's privacy. And then you get something like this, and I don't even think some of the writers at the New York Times and Washington Post like the fact that the information is then used to go run people down and prosecute them. But what also happened here too was they called on people, so people were digging, and as a private individual, you can dig through a lot of this information and somebody's Twitter feed, somebody's Facebook account, or whatever, where they're posting things or a picture, and they can even find metadata and tell exactly where that picture was taken. So this has become a big problem, and so the editorial in the Washington Post this morning is the long arm of the authoritarian state. And I think they're right. And I think this has grown more fast, it has grown more quickly than anybody imagined. For years, those of us who look at Bible prophecy have been talking about a coming authoritarian state. We didn't really know how it would come about. When it was communism, we were afraid that the communists were going to come and control. And now what we find out is that it's technocrats that are doing this, and they're making a fortune off of doing it, and they're doing it to control people to boot. The growth of big tech over the last year, the top 5 companies, I'm going to show you a chart from yesterday's Wall Street Journal to show how big tech grew over the past year. Now, you will admit, there have been hundreds of thousands of businesses that have gone under, people have lost jobs, people have been unemployed. They've been able to paper over a lot of things like what I believe will be a major crash in commercial real estate. And the market is up in a few stocks. Here's a little closer thing. So you can see how these companies grew, and they went from, at the end of 2012, they were 1.33 trillion, these 5 companies together. Their combined market value early last year was 4.93, about $5 trillion. And now they're up to 7.5 trillion combined. It's just amazing. And Microsoft is up 30%. It's worth $1.8 trillion. Apple is worth $2 trillion. Amazon, I don't know what Amazon is worth. It's worth quite a bit. And so this is big tech. These have become the technocrats. And you might remember that Patrick Wood was here back when we used to do conferences occasionally. Well, it was probably 2 years ago, I guess, 3 years ago. And he talked, and he has a thing called Technocracy News. You might follow it. And he said that his view was this was how this beast system would come together in the end times, that it would come together through technocrats. And the interesting thing is the governments don't really need to do anything because the tech companies, they're sort of able to outsource the oppressive, privacy-invading technology that they need to do things. They don't even need to enact laws to control people, but we'll see in a moment that they do this. Here's kind of a concerning article, Ireland's Roxanne, Ireland's new anti-hate speech surveillance technology. Now, Roxanne, they took some of the letters out of this word, real-time network, text and speaker analytics for combating organized crime. And what this originally was to dig into the networks that develop around selling selling drugs, marketing drugs, illegal drugs, and then been able to piece these things together. Now what they're doing, here's just from the article, a biometrics-based platform ostensibly to monitor and crack down on organized crime. An additional application of Roxanne, which its creators advertise freely, is the ability to monitor those guilty of alleged hate speech and political extremism. A product of the EU-funded Horizon 2020 to foster new surveillance technology, Roxanne works across social media sites such as Facebook, YouTube, as well as normal telecommunications platforms, which means like your phone, your regular landline phone, to identify, categorize, and track faces and voices, enabling authorities to paint a more in-depth picture of the network being investigated, whether it be in relation to criminal activity or those deemed politically extreme, enabling authorities to draw on raw data from a variety of sources and platforms in order to recognize common speech patterns, facial features, and geolocation. The end result is both to identify suspects and paint an intricate picture of the networks being put under the microscope. So if you interact with anyone and they happen to be extreme politically, you're going to be somehow drawn into their network when authorities employ this. And so this is concerning technology. So this is Ireland, which a lot of people would consider to be a relatively free country, democratic, but this is the way it's going. Now we know that you get banned from YouTube. My wife sent me a note. I kept saying July 6th. I meant January 6th. The reason I said July 6th was because I want it to be July 6th, because I'm tired of the cold. In any event, so I want to read for you. This is a new article, and it just goes to show that, I guess some people are allowed to talk about things, but other people are not. And so yesterday, or Friday, Time magazine published this article, The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. In other words, it saved us from another term of Donald Trump. And it says, well, here's how it starts out. A weird thing happened right after the November 3 election. Nothing. The nation was braced for chaos. Liberal groups had vowed to take to the streets, planning hundreds of protests across the country. Right-wing militias were girding for battle. In a poll before Election Day, 75% of Americans voiced concern about violence. Instead, an eerie quiet descended. As President Trump refused to concede, the response was not mass action, but crickets. When media organizations called the race for Joe Biden on November 7, jubilation broke out instead as people thronged cities across the U.S. to celebrate the democratic process that resulted in Trump's ouster. A second odd thing happened amid Trump's attempt to reverse the result. Corporate America turned on him. Hundreds of major business leaders, many of whom had backed Trump's candidacy and supported his policies, called on him to concede. To the president, something felt amiss. It was all very, very strange, Trump said on December 2nd. Within days after the election, we witnessed an orchestrated effort to anoint the winner, even while many key states were still being counted. In a way, Trump was right. This is Time magazine. Okay, so listen, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. I'm quoting one of your guys, one of your people, Time magazine. Here's what they then say. There was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, one that both curtailed the protest and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Both surprises were the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. The pact was formalized in a terse little notice joint statement of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and AFL-CIO published on Election Day. Both sides would come to see it as a sort of implicit bargain, inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive racial justice protest, in which the forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace and oppose Trump's assault on democracy. This is Time, okay? Now, okay, so I'm quoting Time magazine, please. I'm quoting Time magazine. This is their article. It goes on to say this. Their work, this is what Time has described as the conspiracy. Their work touched on every aspect of the election. They got states to change voting systems and laws and helped secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding. They fended off voter suppression lawsuits, recruited armies of poll workers, and got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. And for some, you might say, for the first time, and the second time, and the third time, just all happened to be in the same election. They executed national public awareness campaigns that helped Americans understand how the vote count would unfold over days or weeks, preventing Trump's conspiracy theories and false claims of victory from getting more traction. In fact, you remember that thing that the Election Integrity Project, I think it was, or Transition Integrity Project, they had a big think tank, and they told people, like, this is what's going to happen. They, like, laid out the plan, and this is how we're going to respond. Trump's going to complain. Don't worry about it. We got everything under control. We'll be able to and guess what? That roadmap appears to have been the roadmap to what some people think was a coup. And so the question is, does the country ever come back from that? What'll happen in the next election? They're trying to change the demographics of the U.S. See, what happens is, and I think you saw it somewhat in the election, is that when immigrants get in the country, they a lot of times will integrate. So you saw various minority groups, the support for Republicans and Donald Trump. Look, the Republicans, did they lose any House seats? Maybe one. They won all the rest. They gained seats. And Trump gained votes among Hispanics and African Americans and other minority groups. Record levels. Now, I don't understand. So what they have to do is they have to replace those voters. And so there's already a bill that's been put out there, House H.R. 1, the first bill introduced in the new Congress, which is effectively a federal power grab to implement everything that they think worked in this last election. And it's got a bunch of sponsors. And listen, it's put in there by the Democrats. They control the House, they control the Senate, they control the presidency. I have a suspicion it'll pass unless there are some senators that will either filibuster it or cross the lines to vote the other way. And all the Republicans hold the line, which with some of them, it's Mitt Romney, I'm not sure. Look, I love Utah. Send him back to Massachusetts where he really lives. And he just happened to get elected from Utah. So this is what's happening. So you see, it's okay for them to talk about their conspiracy, but if we talk about it, we're conspiracy theorists and insurrectionists. So go read Time magazine, and I think the article was pretty much spot on. Go back and look what I said and some other people were saying about this Transition Integrity Project, because it laid it out perfectly. You can go download the War Game. I think it was first published last July or August in the New York Times. And the label conspiracy theorist is going to be tossed out against Christians like crazy. Here's an example from a magazine called The Conversation. Why creationism bears all the hallmarks of a conspiracy theory. And boy, you know, we got this book by John Whitcomb and Henry Morris, The Genesis Flood. This is like the biggest conspiracy theory book of all time. It denies science. It denies that, it claims that the flood laid down the sediments that you see in the Grand Canyon and that type of thing. Now listen, I love the South American Southwest. And we've been there many times, and you see these giant spires, you know, in Monument Valley. And then you go read these ridiculous things on the markers that wind shaped these over hundreds of thousands of years. It's rock, okay? Wind doesn't usually shape rock. It's water that's moving when those things are still soft. I think the American Southwest is evidence of flood country. And so yeah, I guess in that sense I'm a self-identified conspiracy theorist. But this conversation, they sort of tout themselves as, well, we have all these academic, peer-reviewed people that are here that, so that's who you should believe, and not crazy people like Ken Ham and the Creation Museum and that sort of thing. It's, so this is what's going to happen. Just be prepared for this, that the conspiracy theory label works. So everything you believe is going to be labeled a conspiracy theory. And in this sense, and I'll talk about this in a minute, we're going to be like the first century church. Because you remember what happened, and there's some examples, and I'll share the one or two from the book of Acts, where how did they go against the apostles as they were out preaching the gospel? They turned them into insurrectionists. That's the label that they used. And so I think the pattern of what happened at the church at the beginning will be the pattern that happens to the church at the end. So just be prepared for it. Here's a little graphic. Again, this comes from the Washington Post. A visual breakdown of Biden's barrage of executive orders in his first weeks. This, what they did was they went through and they laid out all the executive orders, presidential proclamations that Biden has done in his first 16 days. By the way, today is day 18. We're only 18 days into this thing. That's a very sobering fact. It's only been 18 days since he was sworn in. So he's up to, 30, well, here's a comparison of the executive orders. Biden 29, Trump had done 8, Obama 9, and Bush 3 in the same time frame. And the only number in the Biden administration that's higher than 29 is Jen Psaki, the press secretary's use of the term circle back. Because I think she's up to like about 1,000. And that's only because she doesn't do them on Saturday and Sunday. I don't think I'm exaggerating. I remember when she used to be the chief, I'm trying to think of the apologist for the nonsense that went on in the Obama State Department. She was the spokesperson. So she's been well trained, and she's been completely given over. So here is some stuff from the UK. Tory MPs left horrified by new child spies legislation. Boris Johnson faces a major Tory backlash this week over plans to allow children to be used as spies by state agencies against their parents. Ian Duncan Smith, the former Tory leader, and David Davis, the former Brexit secretary, are among Tory MPs backing rebel proposals. Of course, now this is a rebel proposal. that we want to oppose legislation that has children spy on their parents. So if you oppose that, you're a rebel. And you're probably a conspiracy theorist too. So we got to get the terminology correct. So in other words, Boris Johnson supports this. Mr. Davis told the Daily Telegraph the government faced a major backlash if it pushed ahead with the plans. Everyone I have spoken to has been horrified by it when it has been explained to them. It will allow 16 and 17-year-olds to spy on their parents. It will also authorize them to commit crimes as well, so it needs to be extremely tightly controlled, and those controls need to be greater than what the government is proposing. Once you start taking action like this to put spies in people's homes, whatever the purpose, this does have complications. It is very important for government to recognize that this is not something that should be easily done in a democratic state. Now, it was defeated, but the fact that it was proposed, it's just shocking. Older children aged 16 and 17 could even be recruited to spy on their parents if they were suspected of being involved in crime or terrorism. In other words, terrorism now meaning if you have the wrong political views. This is the UK. Now, I remember when I was in London, I went over to the British Library and I saw two original copies of the Magna Carta. So I would just tell the UK government, stop the charade. Just go burn that thing. Go burn down the library of where a lot of our freedoms came from or were recognized, because you're not following them. There's also a magazine called The House that is done by members of Parliament, and this is where they can publish their articles. And so here is an article by Alicia Kearns, a member of Parliament. She is a Tory. She is identified, well, here's the article. We need specific legislation rather than relying on existing GBH laws, that's grievous bodily harm laws, to give survivors the ability to prosecute those responsible, create formal support for survivors, ban advertising of the practice, and create a strong deterrent in law against conversion therapy. And in the Christian Institute website has an article on this, and they're frankly horrified. But here it is, Tory MP lists prayer alongside rape in their proposed conversion therapy ban. Now you're saying the Christian Institute is making this up, correct? They must be crazy conspiracy theorists. But look at how they describe her, a conservative MP. That's troubling. Everywhere I looked, this person who wrote this article, I'm going to identify her as female. You know, the evidence that I see trends that way. The evidence that I see does not trend towards her being described as a conservative in any manner. She's a radical tear down, burn down the system, apostate, demonically controlled, evil person. She says this: we need specific legislation to prosecute those responsible. So that's what they're doing. On the grievous bodily harm, on the eve of LGBTQ plus History Month, it's a sin, premiered on our screens. This is from her article. It's a haunting and heartbreaking telling of the 1980 AIDS epidemic, laying bare the trauma inflicted by prejudice, ignorance, and frankly, hatred on the lives of a group of gay men and their loved ones. So-called conversion therapy is just as it sounds. And listen to this. Attempts to use medical, psychological, and social methods to convert someone away from innate sexual orientation. It can range from therapy and prayer sessions to aversive treatments like electroshocks or even corrective rape. So see there, it puts in the same sentence. So it does connect prayer sessions with corrective rape. The words and writings of a reprobate conservative. The impact is deeply harmful, causing lifelong difficulties in forming relationships, experiencing positive emotions, and maintaining self-esteem, as well as painful physical manifestations of abuse. Legislation should also include a power for family courts to put in place protection orders to stop parents from forcing their children to undergo this abusive practice, or even taking them abroad for it, and a mandatory legal requirement to report known or suspected cases of conversion therapy. Any ban must include attempts to prevent against the individual wishes a gender transition. Now, listen. So conversion therapy is you can't stop somebody from transitioning, from mutilating their body. And by the way, women's rights groups oppose this nonsense. Feminists oppose this nonsense. Gay activists oppose this nonsense. And I just wonder why is it called conversion therapy to stop someone from mutilating their body, but it's not conversion therapy when they actually do it? And doctors' groups are upset because it says you're interfering in the physician-patient relationship. There must also, she says, of course, be provisions made for the complex discussions around faith and sexuality too, and any ban should include a recognition of our fundamental freedoms of thought and belief. But that cannot be an excuse for inaction. She's lying when she says that. She doesn't give a rip about religious beliefs. Christian Institute in response, Sharon Kelly, a deputy director at the Christian Institute, said this: "It is outrageous to suggest that praying with someone is in any way comparable to rape. Christians everywhere naturally oppose the abusive practices mentioned, but they are already illegal. Banning prayer and pastoral care," and this is really what's at the heart of it, "with unwanted same-sex attraction or gender confusion would be unacceptable, and parents everywhere would be horrified at the prospect of being threatened with a court order for warning their kids off damaging puberty blockers. The activist shocking game plan is out in the open for all to see. They want to exploit public revulsion, the claims of corrective rape, in order to criminalize fundamental Christian practices and make it illegal for parents to protect their kids. It is alarming to see an MP driving such a radical agenda," and I would add a correction there, a conservative MP driving a so-called conservative MP. In Australia, they have, the state of Victoria has passed this conversion therapy bill. I believe it's now law. Martin Iles, I-L-E-S, you can find him on Facebook and YouTube. He has a Christian group, and I don't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. He's done some excellent work talking about this. And now somebody that that lives in Western Australia, which is outside of Perth, it's the boonies. I mean, there's not much out there in Western Australia. Say that Western Australia is considering enacting the exact same law. So Melbourne, which is where is in the state of Victoria, and I think that New South Wales, where Sydney is, will follow. And this is, I mean, even an editorial in the Australian says There's something unusual going on when a draft criminal law declared essential to protect gay men, lesbians, and transgender people from harmful conversion therapy generates serious concern among groups as disparate as psychiatrists, physicians, religious leaders, feminists, lesbians, and gay men, or at least some of them. And that's the reality. The Victorian government bill's law to outlaw conversion therapy is due to return to state parliament for debate on Thursday. It's to chill religious practices. Here, I've reported on what's going on in Scotland, where they are trying to put into place similar type of laws about hate speech. Now, some people wanted to put in a law that allowed freedom of expression of religion. They proposed an amendment, and they said, oh yeah, we're going to do that. We'll do that. Yeah, we think that's a good idea. So now what's happened? Well, the proposed free speech clause had stated behavior or material is not to be taken to threatening or abusive solely on the basis that it involves or includes discussion or criticism of matters related to transgender identity. Seemed like a reasonable amendment, right? So here's the Attorney General of Scotland have spoken to opposition members, and we have all agreed not to move our amendments in relation to freedom of expression. By not moving, we'll hopefully achieve consensus on a broad freedom of expression clause for stage 3 that covers all characteristics so no group feels targeted. We all want to ensure freedom of speech, including the freedom to disagree robustly with any policy is protected. We also agree that this is not mutually exclusive to protecting the rights of people to be free from hatred. I apologize for any hurt caused. It was not my intention. This guy is a big fat fake when he talks about freedom of speech. And look at this. This is Nicola Sturgeon, who is the, whatever the person in charge of Scotland is called, the leader of the West's most right-on government. And she's all for it, with the promise of more trans rights and an end to period poverty. Scotland's first minister is aspiring to be the patron saint of political correctness. She thinks it will convert the young to her nationalist cause. But how does it play with your average Scot? Not very well. In Acts chapter 5, there was a confrontation. There also came a multitude out of the cities round about Jerusalem, bringing sick folks, and unto them which were vexed with unclean spirits, and they were healed every one. Then the high priest rose up, and all they that were with him, which is the sect of the Sadducees, and were filled with indignation, wrath, and laid their hands on the apostles and put them in the common prison. But the angel of the Lord by night opened the prison doors and brought them forth and said, Go, stand and speak in the temple to the people all the words of this life. And when they heard that, they entered into the temple early in the morning and taught. But the high priest came, and they that were with him, and called the council together, and all the senate of the children of Israel, and sent to the prison to have them brought. Now when the high priest and the captain of the temple and the chief priests heard these things, they doubted of them whereunto this would grow. Then came one and told them, saying, Behold, the men who you put in prison are standing in the temple and teaching the people. Then went the captain with the officers and brought them without violence, for they feared the people, lest they should have been stoned. And when they had brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest asked them, saying, Did we not straitly command you that you should not teach in this name? And behold, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine, and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, We ought to obey God rather than men. The God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom ye slew and hanged on a tree. Him hath God exalted with his right hand to be a prince and a savior, to give repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins. And we are his witnesses of these things, and so is also the Holy Spirit, whom God hath given to them that obey him. And when they heard that, they were cut to the heart and took counsel to slay them. And then we know that Gamaliel stood up, a doctor of the law, had a reputation among all the people, and commanded to put the apostles forth a little space. And he said unto them, Ye men of Israel, take heed to yourselves. What do you intend to do as touching these men? For behold, before these days rose up Theodas, boasting himself to be somebody, to whom a number of men, about 400, joined themselves, who was slain, and all, as many obeyed him, were scattered and brought to naught. After this rose up Judas of Galilee in the days of the taxing, and drew away much people after him. He also perished, and all, even as many as obeyed him, were dispersed. And now I say unto you, refrain from these men, and let them be alone. For if this counsel or this work be of men, it will come to naught. But if it be of God, ye cannot overthrow it, lest haply ye be found even to fight against God. And so Gamaliel calmed everything down. Now, where Gamaliel didn't get right was, whereas Judas of Galilee had been killed and gone away, Jesus was still alive. I don't think he believed it. We also know that in Acts chapter 19, in Ephesus, where they had this, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis, Diana, a magnificent structure, and people made money off of it. It was a money-making enterprise. And the apostles came and talked against it in the theater, and there was a dispute about it at the theater in Ephesus. This is a magnificent structure. That, to give you an idea how big it is, it held about 24,000 people. So it's not just a little amphitheater. It's a huge structure. And so we know that they brought charges against them and some people intervened. But the thing that we learn from Acts is the apostles never stopped. They never stopped proclaiming the message. Because the operative thing for them was we ought to obey God. When it comes to this, we ought to obey God rather than men. So, as I said, when I get to talking more about the Great Setup or the Great Reset, we'll talk more about the Sustainable Development Goals. Time Magazine also has a new special edition out, Destination 2030. Here's what it says. 10 years to change the world. I saw this graphic. I thought it was, we always ask, where are we on God's clock? A friend of mine has a YouTube channel show called Minute to Midnight. And I think this is a good graphic. It's a minute to midnight, somebody's pushing it the rest of the way. Also thought this was an interesting graphic about the evolution of man. You have the technocrats, and then they're going to create artificial intelligence. And I saw an article this week that says, at some point, artificial intelligence, you won't be able to control it. And that's a concern. And I don't think it's an overblown concern. And you can buy this t-shirt at Amazon. Big technocrat, what's Jeff Bezos worth, $160 billion or something now? But here's a t-shirt you can buy, Beware Artificial Intelligence. And I thought that's a great graphic. So the Sustainable Development Goals are everywhere. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has been sort of on a march to make Riyadh one of the world's 10 richest cities. About 25 miles outside of Riyadh, they have a new, about 25 miles, a shared vision for Qiddiya, a future global entertainment hub. And it's roller coasters and water parks and all this stuff. It looks like it's in an old quarry. There's another, I talked about the line a couple weeks ago that Mohammed bin Salman is introducing. Here's a little video where he's involved in it. And look, it's just kind of, I think it's kind of creepy the way he puts it together. He's talking about NEOM. Kind of goes through the development of things. What's next?
على مدى العصور والحضارات كانت تبنى
Throughout
المدن
history, cities were built
لحماية الإنسان بمساحات ضيقة
to
وبعد
protect
الثورة الصناعية
people in a confined space.
بنيت المدن لتضع
Cities
الآلة
prioritize machines, cars, and factories over people.
المدن التي
Even in cities that claim to be in the world's most advanced, people spend years of their lives commuting. By 2050, commute times will double. By 2050, 1 billion people will be displaced due to rising CO2 emissions and sea levels. 90% of people breathe polluted air. Why should we sacrifice nature for the sake of development? Why should 7 million people die every year because of pollution? Why should we lose 1 million people every year due to traffic accidents? Why should we accept wasting years of people's lives commuting? Therefore, we need to transform the concept of this into a futuristic one. So today, as chairman of the board of the directors of NEOM, I present to you the line, a city of 1 million residents with a length of 170 kilometers that preserves 95% of nature within NEOM, with 0 cars, 0 streets, and 0 carbon emissions. You can fulfill all of your daily requirements within a 5-minute walk. And I guess, with COVID, you're not going to want to go more than 5 minutes away from home anyway. Anyway, so this is his concept of the line. I just find it a little bit creepy. So let's look at a few other things. This is an interesting article published in a Israeli magazine, but also on the Begin Sadat Center Perspectives by Mordecai Kedar. I think he's a brilliant man. He says this is an executive summary. Syrian President Bashar Assad, who now views the Iranian presence in his country as a burden, wants to oust Tehran from Syrian soil. And he has come to realize that achieving that goal will require Israel's involvement. That may be why secret contacts are being reported between the two countries. And he goes on to say that this has been sporadically reported. Assad will always deny it. But Assad doesn't like his infrastructure continually bombed. For example, there was some attacks on Damascus airport. There was a big Iranian plane that showed up there, and they offloaded a bunch of stuff, and Israel bombed it. And this is going to happen. Israel's not going to let Iran get too much of a foothold in Syria. And so someone said, is this possible? Could Assad really be reaching out? And the individual who was giving some information, do you think it's possible? The officer replied, certainly, I'm prepared to reach an agreement with him tomorrow morning. But to tell the truth, we haven't spoken about this with the chief of staff or with the political echelon because it's still at the starting point with improvised mediators. The important thing is that there's a possibility of breaking up the radical axis, the Iranian axis. So Israel is interested in pursuing this. And so is Assad. Jonathan Spire, I mentioned this article last week. He writes a little bit, he writes again, and this is in Arab News, about Erdogan using private militias throughout the Middle East to further his agenda. They conclude with this: the Turkish government also maintains relations with older paramilitary formations, such as the ultranationalist Grey Wolves organization. This activity is especially nefarious when considered against the backdrop of the unrest that has swept through the Middle East over the last decade. One of its key results has been the severe weakening and, in some cases, the near disappearance, lost my place here, of formal state structures. In Syria, Libya, Lebanon, and Iraq, these have been replaced by a chaotic reality of militias, lawlessness, and anarchy. The people of those countries have been the main victims. Turkey, despite being a NATO member state, a candidate for EU membership, and an ostensible ally of the United States, is currently one of the main factors maintaining and destabilizing this situation. This needs to end. Militias, terror groups, and Islamist extremism are all elements that the Middle East must outgrow if it is to achieve stability and reconstruction. The paramilitary network established by Erdogan in partnership with the Islamist military officers of Sadat, I mentioned this last week, that was started by a real radical Islamist general that had to be removed from the army. And they were the ones who put in place, remember this is the, from Yeni Sefek, which is one of the mouthpieces of Erdogan. I mentioned this last week and again a few years ago when it first came up. It looks like, you know, what Bible prophecy teachers have been making up as an Ezekiel, at least in part an Ezekiel 38 map. And it even includes the Stan republics, which are Turkish, Turkmen, ethnicity, Muslim countries in Central Asia. And so this is happening. And then this is an even more graphic thing. This is the Islamic world, including even Indonesia, which I think is the most populous or second most I think it's the second most populous Islamic. It has the second largest population of Muslims of any country in the world. Do you know which one is number one, by the way? India. Yeah, like several hundred million. And, you know, Jonathan Spyer's been writing about this for years. He talked about Turkey moving into North Lebanon. This is from the August 28th, 2020 issue of Jerusalem Post. Another thing that Erdogan did this week was he came marching into Parliament and meetings and said he's standing for election in 2023. In 2018, they amended the Constitution to give him the opportunity to run for two five-year terms as president, but he's having some political problems. So what was his proposal that he brought to people this past week, which kind of came out of the blue and really kind of knocked opposition off of their feet? Well, he's proposing that we're going to amend the Constitution again. So essentially, he's sort of following the Putin model in Russia, that when your term is up, I don't care what the old Constitution said, just draft a new one. Do you think a new one's coming to the United States, by the way? I have a feeling that it might. Well, I don't see it in my graphic. But another place that Erdogan is, there was an article on Al Akbar this week that talked about Turkey really getting involved in the sort of fluid situation in Libya. And again, that kind of fits this scenario of Ezekiel 38 that we talk about quite a bit. Now, I don't think that this is imminent, but look, you see right here, what's part of this? Libya. What's another one that's part of it? Sudan. And these other countries. So the whole situation is very fluid. So if you want to read more about it, get Jonathan Spyer's article. A couple of other things, and then we'll get out of here. But and you know that I never mean a couple of other things when I say a couple of other things. It's subject to interpretation. My interpretation. But this continues to be a sort of a, if you look at this Psalm 83 and the Arab Accords, it appears that eventually there's something that's going to happen to bring Syria. We already talked a little bit about Syria sort of reaching out because they're tired of Iran. And Assad only has a little part of the country anyway. And he'd like to get stabilized, but he needs money to rebuild. And so in Syria, the cost of rebuilding is in the billions, tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. And some estimates I saw said that the rebuilding of Syria could take 25 to 30 years. And so when you look at everything else going on in the world, you sort of reach the conclusion that I don't know that Syria will be rebuilt before the Lord comes. You go to Lebanon, and Lebanon has major problems. And I think I told you last week or week before that when they're talking about rebuilding Beirut, it's now estimated that Beirut may not be rebuilt from that explosion that took place last summer for 10 or 20 years. I don't know that Beirut will be rebuilt before the Lord returns. They also, I didn't have time to pull this out because I just saw it this morning. They discovered another, reported in a German newspaper that as they were sort of pulling Beirut apart, they found another group storage of chemicals that would have been sufficient to blow up in the same fashion that the one did back in August. And so Lebanon is very unstable, and they're involved in negotiations over the Mediterranean. And of course, this is a Hezbollah newspaper, so Hezbollah's supported newspaper. So they're going to be very pro-Hezbollah. But Iran is falling apart. I mean, Lebanon is falling apart. I was reading an article, might have been in the Jerusalem Post, by a lady, and she said that somebody that she knew in Tripoli had said that a father there was trying to sell his 3-year-old to someone because, or give her away because he couldn't feed her, because there's no food. And that's a problem as well. Here's a good graphic from Arab News about the Palestinian cause is causing division in the Middle East. Here's another Al Akbar newspaper about their theory is that Mohammed bin Zayed, who's the crown prince of the United Arab Emirates, has been sort of controlling Mohammed bin Salman. So that's an interesting article. Caroline Glick, couple articles you should. This is something new that came out just yesterday. The International Criminal Court has declared it has jurisdiction to probe war crimes against Israel. Now, some people think that that's a little bit overblown, but it's reported in the Arab press, and it's a big deal. People are concerned about it. Israel Hayom has a major 2-page article. If you want to, there's a way to get it. Go to Google Chrome, get the article from the Israel Hayom website, paste the URL into Google Chrome, and then the right-hand corner of that, the URL line, there's a place where you can just click on translate from Arabic or Hebrew to English. It's a good way to read these articles. But here is just a 1-minute comment from Prime Minister Netanyahu as he's facing election in a couple months, what he said.
When the ICC investigates Israel for fake war crimes, this is pure anti-Semitism. The court established to prevent atrocities like the Nazi Holocaust against the Jewish people is now targeting the one state of the Jewish people. First, it outrageously claims that when Jews live in our homeland, this is a war crime. Second, it claims that when democratic Israel defends itself against terrorists who murder our children, rocket our cities, we're committing another war crime. Yet the ICC refuses to investigate brutal dictatorships like Iran and Syria, who commit horrific atrocities almost daily. As Prime Minister of Israel, I assure you, we will fight this perversion of justice with all our might.
And here's a thing of concern. Caroline Glick, writing in Israel Hayom, her article entitled, Biden's Drive to War in the Middle East. So these accomplished a lot in 18 days. None of it very good, according to Caroline Glick. And here's what she notes in the article. On Monday, Iran tested a new rocket. The Zulajana rocket is a 25-meter, 82-foot stage, three-stage rocket with a solid fuel engine for its first 2 stages and a liquid fuel rocket for its 3rd stage. It can carry a 500-pound payload. Its thrust is 75 kilotons, which is far more than required to launch a satellite into orbit. The large thrust makes the rocket more comparable to an intercontinental ballistic missile than a space launch vehicle. This is something that is very concerning to the Israelis. And it works. I mean, this is, and Iran is very good at, releasing their video on these things about, and it's a liquid-fueled rocket. It can carry a payload, and it can reach the UK. That's the range that it has. And I personally believe that Iran and North Korea are working together to develop these rockets. The Iranian economy is falling apart, but they've spent about $250 million to develop this particular rocket. And so Caroline says, listen, everything that the Biden administration is doing, the Iranians are now enriching uranium to 20% purity. The U.S. thinks that Iran could have enough nuclear material for a nuclear bomb within 7 weeks. Israel thinks it'll take about 6 months. And the question is, what are they going to do about it? And certainly Israel has concluded you can't trust the Americans anymore to deal with it. It's all going to be on Israel. Many commentators view the Biden administration nothing more than Obama's third term. And from the perspective of its Iran policies, this is certainly the case. President Biden's Iran policy was conceived and is being implemented by the same people who negotiated the JCPOA under Obama. The official most responsible for the JCPOA was Rob O'Malley, who spearheaded the negotiations with Iran. In an October 2019 article in Foreign Affairs, Malley set out what the next Democrat administration's Iran policy should look like. He claimed that Trump's maximum pressure strategy was bringing the region to the brink of war because it was based on empowering U.S. allies led by Israel and Saudi Arabia to combat Iran's regional aggression. In other words, it was based on restoring and reinforcing the regional balance of power that Obama set about undermining to Iran's benefit and to the detriment of America's regional allies. Malley wrote that the only way to prevent war was to go back to the JCPOA and to Obama's policy of strengthening Iran at the expense of U.S. allies. The rocket test money demonstrated that Iran doesn't share Malley's view of its position. It didn't spend $250 million on a rocket missile that can hit Europe because it is scared of Israel and Saudi Arabia. It developed this rocket because it wants the capacity to attack Europe. And it wants to attack Europe because it is a revolutionary rather than a status quo regime that seeks global domination, not regional stability. And they're theologically driven. And I would say that Iran is the world insurrectionist. Instead of worrying about a few hundred people in the capital, you ought to worry about a country that seems dedicated and says they're dedicated to doing this, and they have the theological background, or the theological beliefs to require it. So Caroline says, listen, we're in the third term of Obama. Here's another article from Melanie Phillips that comes out and says, Obama's third term. Some people are fretting, she says, that U.S. President Joe Biden has not yet picked up the phone to call Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They worry that this may betoken a new coolness by the United States towards Israel, to which one can only wonder, what planet are such people living on? For Israel scarcely needs the absence of a phone call to tell it that it has a grave problem with the new occupant of the White House. And then she goes on to list the long things. The Biden administration has resumed funding UNRWA, reopened the Palestinian mission to Washington, and recommitted itself to the two-state solution. It has thus re-empowered the Palestinians' agenda of demonizing and blackmailing Israel in order to destroy it, and afforded the Palestinian status while they do so. Also wants to return to the JCPOA, and it just goes on and on and on with all the things that they're doing to indicate that this really is Obama's third term. Remember that little clip I played of Obama when he was being interviewed by Stephen Colbert, and he said, if I could, I'd just be kind of cool to just sit in my basement and, maybe pick up the phone occasionally and tell people what to do, and they would do it. here's the thing. I don't think he even needs to pick up the phone because these people are so far gone. Let's see. Okay, one more story. Next week, I'm going to share with you a video about archaeological discovery in Jordan that confirms the Bible. A new video out by Joel Kramer. Somebody just sent it to me this morning, so it's very well done, but I didn't have time to pull it down and put it into this week's update. But here's an interesting, this is an article from the New York Times, again. Battle to preserve 4,000 years of Iraq's past. And what are they talking about? They're talking about Babylon. Now, there are a lot of different views about who end time Babylon is, Mystery Babylon is. Some say it's the Roman Catholic Church. Some say it's Jerusalem. Some say that it's a Babylonian type system. And then others say it will be a rebuilt Babylon in Babylon. And so when Saddam Hussein was reconstructing a little part of this in an archaeological park, everybody got real excited and said, see, it's going to be the real Babylon. And I'm not trying, and maybe this is true. I'm just saying if it's going to be this massive commercial city, you have to look at an example of like Dubai. Dubai's taken, 35 years to build with all those big buildings and man-made islands. It's phenomenal what they've done. But it didn't happen overnight. They're not going to rebuild Babylon overnight. And the interesting thing about this, they don't even know everything that's there. They've only sort of scratched the surface archaeologically because there's stuff way down that they don't even know about yet. And so only a small part of it's even been archaeologically exposed. But to the point of the thing is, Saddam made bricks out of cement to rebuild some of the areas. Well, you put cement bricks on top of mud clay bricks, you got a problem. And so the thing's starting to fall apart, I guess is what I'm saying. So what I'm just saying is, look, if this is the Mystery Babylon of Revelation 17, and it's going to be this great commercial city, control commerce, I think you're putting the end times a little bit further out. There's a logistical problem we always have to look at the logistics of our eschatological views. So I see people say that Ezekiel 38 is imminent. I think it's going to happen. I just don't think it happens. It's not happening next week because there's not the forces there. The logistics haven't been satisfied. Same thing with the view on Babylon. If it's going to be a great commercial city, then you gotta rebuild it. And at least based on current technology, it takes a while to rebuild cities. So I just think we need to consider that in our views. And I see people say Damascus is going to be destroyed tomorrow. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, Israel's been bombing around Damascus for years, and maybe they'll back off to try to work something out with Assad. So all these things take time. And so these will unfold as God determines. They will unfold. And we will see eventually. I said this week in an interview, I'm a fact guy. I like facts. And prophecy about something in the future is not a fact yet. So the best evidence of how the prophecy is going to play out exactly will be how it plays out exactly when it happens. Until then, we can talk about it. We can argue about it. We can, raise our voices and all this other stuff, but understand that we're all trying to see how this works out. So we just need to think through all of and by the way, I don't think I have it all figured out. Okay? If I had it all figured out, I wouldn't be shoveling 80 pounds of snow every shovel, I would have figured something out better. So anyway, listen. Things are going to unfold pretty quickly from here. we're 18 days into the new administration. And I don't even think we know everything that's happened yet, what they've done. So I should have called this one, rather than Muzzled, I should have called it the Destroyers. Because they're tearing, listen, look at conservative MPs are trying to put in place bans on conversion therapy where you can even talk about these transgender issues that feminists have problems with. I'm surprised somebody didn't describe her as a Christian. So look, all of these little things indicate what? That I think we live in the end times. Where we are exactly in the time frame, I don't know. I'm increasingly of the mind that a graphic like this is fairly accurate. And we're pushing it to midnight. But that's a good thing, because the Lord returns. So, be calm. And remember, we ought to obey God rather than men. Father, thank you so much for your word. Lord, I pray that you will help us to take to heart the admonition that we read in Acts today, that we ought to obey God rather than men, and know that we are to act faithful to you, to your word, follow your instructions, and do everything to glorify you. We pray that you will help us keep that in mind. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.